The ink on the document was still wet, gleaming under the harsh, sterile lights of the private office in Gangnam. Nia stared at her own signature, the loops of the N, slightly trembling, betraying the calm facade she had plastered onto her face for the last hour. Across the heavy mahogany desk sat Min-ho Park, the head of the Cheon-sa Syndicate. He was a man composed of sharp angles and tailored darkness, his suit fitting him like a second skin, his eyes devoid of anything resembling warmth. He didn't look at the paper, he looked at her. It was a gaze that weighed souls, calculating their worth in leverage and liability. To him, Nia wasn't a woman, she was a strategic acquisition. The terms were simple, brutal, and lucrative. She would become Mrs. Park Min-ho, the respectable, foreign trophy wife needed to appease the traditionalist elders of the clan who demanded family stability from their leader. In exchange, the finest medical specialists in Seoul would take over her younger sister's care, treating the rare autoimmune disorder that was slowly eating Maya alive. $5 million in an escrow account, full medical coverage, and in 2 years, a quiet divorce. Article 4, Section 2, Min-ho said, his voice deep and smooth like gravel wrapped in velvet. He tapped the paper with a manicured finger. Read it again. Nia swallowed the lump in her throat and recited the words she had already memorized. No emotional entanglements. The marriage is a facade to be maintained only in public. In private, both parties retain full autonomy. No questions asked. No intimacy required. No feelings allowed. Min-ho nodded, finally leaning back in his leather chair. Good, I do not pay for complications, Nia. I pay for order. Do not mistake my home for yours and do not mistake me for a husband. Nia met his gaze, lifting her chin. Her dark skin stood in stark contrast to the pale, clinical coldness of the room, and she felt like a splash of ink on a pristine white page, out of place, yet impossible to ignore. I'm not here for a husband, Mr. Park. I'm here for a paycheck and a cure. As long as the wire transfer clears for Maya's surgery tomorrow, you can be a ghost for all I care. He smirked, a fleeting, dangerous expression. Then we have an accord. The wedding 3 weeks later was a spectacle of obscene wealth. It was held at a private estate overlooking the Han River, attended by politicians, CEOs, and men with scars hidden beneath Italian silk. Nia wore a dress that cost more than her childhood home, a cascade of white lace and diamonds that felt like armor. When Min-ho slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was warm, his grip firm. For the cameras and the watching elders, he brushed a stray curl from her forehead, his thumb lingering on her temple. The crowd cooed at the tenderness. But Nia felt the warning in his touch. Play the part. She played it perfectly. She smiled, she held his arm, she accepted the toasts. But the moment the heavy oak doors of his penthouse closed behind them that night, the performance shattered. Min-ho loosened his tie, walked past her without a word, and poured himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. He went to his wing of the sprawling apartment, and she went to hers. The first 3 months were exactly as promised, cold, efficient, and distant. They were roommates who occasionally played lovers at charity galas. Nia spent her days at the hospital with Maya, watching the color return to her sister's cheeks and her nights reading in the solarium of the penthouse. Min-ho was a shadow. He came home late, smelled of tobacco and sometimes gunpowder, and left before she woke. But then the shift began. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping erosion of the boundaries they had set. It started with the security detail. Min-ho doubled the guards assigned to her. Then he started coming home for dinner. He claimed it was to review schedules, but they barely spoke of business. Instead, he watched her. One rainy Tuesday, Nia was sitting by the window, watching the Seoul skyline weep. She didn't hear him enter. She only felt the sudden warmth of a cashmere shawl being draped over her shoulders. She jumped, turning to find Min-ho standing right behind her, dangerously close. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were dark, intense, burning with a hunger that violated Article 4. "You looked cold," he murmured, his hand lingering on her shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of her collarbone. Nia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, not out of fear but out of a sudden, traitorous spike of adrenaline. "The heating is on, Min-ho, I'm fine." He didn't pull away. He stepped closer, boxing her in against the window. "You spend too much time alone. You should be seen with me more, not just for business. The air between them grew thick, charged with static. This was wrong. This was dangerous. If he fell for her, if he became possessive, the clean break she needed in 2 years would vanish. Men like Min-ho didn't let go of things they decided they owned. And worse, she felt a magnetic pull toward him, toward the hidden violence and the surprising softness he kept locked away. She pulled away abruptly, the shawl slipping. "Read the contract, Min-ho. No feelings. You're breaking the rules." Min-ho's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with frustration. "I am the one who writes the rules, Nia." He turned and walked away, but the damage was done. The dynamic had shifted. He began bringing her gifts, rare books, jewelry that wasn't for show, her favorite flowers. He started canceling meetings to be home when she returned from the hospital. The indifference was gone, replaced by a suffocating, intense focus that terrified her. He was falling in love, or whatever twisted version of love a man like him was capable of, and it threatened everything. Nia knew she had to stop it. She had to remind him that she was an employee, a fake wife, not a soulmate. She needed to build a wall so high he couldn't climb it. She needed to prove she was just doing a job. And then the opportunity walked through the front door, wearing a leather jacket and a crooked devil-may-care grin. It was Yi-sung, Min-ho's estranged younger brother. He had returned from exile in Japan, bringing a storm with him. Where Min-ho was ice and discipline, Yi-sung was fire and chaos. He crashed a dinner party Min-ho was hosting for a corrupt senator. Nia watched from across the room as Yi-sung poured himself a drink, mocking the guests, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. He didn't look at her with Min-ho's heavy intensity. He looked at her with amusement and a spark of wicked curiosity. Min-ho stiffened beside her, his hand gripping her waist tightly, too tightly. "Stay away from him," Min-ho whispered in her ear, his voice dropping to a growl. "Yi-sung is poison." Nia looked at Min-ho's hand on her waist, possessive and claiming. She looked at his eyes, filled with a jealousy he had no right to feel. Then she looked back at Yi-sung, who raised his glass to her in a silent toast. An idea formed in her mind. A terrible, reckless idea. Min-ho valued loyalty and ownership above all else. If she wanted to drive him away, if she wanted to kill the feelings growing in him and re-establish the professional distance, she had to hit him where it hurt. She had to bruise his ego. She had to make him believe she was incapable of loving him. Later that night, after the guests had fled the tension, Nia found Yi-sung on the balcony smoking. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. He didn't turn around when she approached. "So," Yi-sung said, exhaling a cloud of smoke, "you're the woman who finally got my brother to sign a marriage certificate. Expensive taste, I see." Nia leaned against the railing, keeping her distance but angling her body toward him. "I have expensive needs," she replied, keeping her voice cool. Yi-sung laughed, turning to face her. He was handsome in a sharper, younger way than Min-ho, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "And Min-ho is boring, efficient, rich, powerful, but boring. You look like a woman who is suffocating, sister-in-law." "I'm not your sister-in-law. Not really," Nia said, lowering her voice. "It's a contract." Yi-sung's eyebrows shot up. "A fake marriage, interesting, and let me guess. Min-ho is forgetting that part. I saw the way he looked at you tonight, like he wanted to kill anyone who breathed your air." Nia nodded, gripping the cold metal railing. "I need him to back off. I need him to remember this is business." Yi-sung stepped closer, tossing his cigarette over the edge. The smell of rain and expensive cologne surrounded him. "And you want to use me to do it. You want to make him jealous, or make him hate you." "I want to prove I'm a professional," Nia lied, though the line between lie and truth was blurring. "I want to show him that I don't care about his rules or his heart. I want to show him I'm free." Yi-sung studied her for a long moment, a strange, unreadable expression crossing his face. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. "I've always hated my brother's rules," Yi-sung whispered, leaning in so close his breath brushed her ear. "If you want to start a war, Nia, I'm the best weapon you'll find. But be careful. When you play with me, you don't just burn bridges. You burn the whole kingdom down." Nia felt a shiver of fear, but she suppressed it. She thought of Maya, safe in the hospital. She thought of Min-ho's suffocating love. "I'm not afraid of fire," she said. Yi-sung chuckled darkly. Good, because we start tomorrow. The war between the brothers did not begin with guns or knives. It began with a whisper in a crowded room, and a hand placed too casually on the small of a back. Nia and Yi-sung executed their plan with the precision of a scalpel, slicing away at Min-ho's composure layer by layer. It started small. A shared laugh at breakfast that fell silent the moment Min-ho entered the room. Nia accepting a ride from Yi-sung to the hospital instead of the armored convoy Min-ho had assigned. At the charity auction for the Seoul Arts Foundation, Nia sat between the two men, a diamond of tension. While Min-ho stared stoically ahead, bidding millions on a Joseon dynasty vase, Yi-sung leaned in, whispering something into Nia's ear that made her throw her head back and laugh, a genuine, throaty sound that Min-ho had never been able to elicit from her. The sound cracked through the stiff atmosphere. Min-ho's hand clenched around his champagne flute until the stem snapped, the crystal shattering with a sharp ping that silenced the table. He didn't look at his hand, bleeding slightly. He looked at Nia, his eyes pools of black ice, hiding a fire that was rapidly consuming him. "You are bleeding, brother," Yi-sung noted, his voice dripping with mock concern as he dabbed a napkin at the table. "You've always been too gripping. You crush the things you try to hold." Min-ho stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harsh against the floor. "Clean this up," he ordered his men, ignoring Yi-sung entirely, and fixed his gaze on Nia. "We are leaving." In the car, the silence was suffocating. Nia stared out the window, her heart racing. She told herself this was necessary. She told herself that Min-ho's possessiveness was a liability, that his love was a cage she had to break before it locked her in forever. But when she glanced at his profile, illuminated by the passing streetlights, she didn't see a tyrant. She saw a man in pain. He refused to look at her, his jaw set so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. The guilt twisted in her stomach, sharp and cold. She was hurting him to save him from himself, or perhaps to save herself from falling for a man whose world was built on blood. Game escalated. Yi-sung was relentless. He began showing up at the penthouse when Min-ho was away on business, filling the silent halls with music and chaos. He took Nia to underground racing clubs, to hole-in-the-wall noodle shops where the steam fogged up the windows, places where the air smelled of danger and freedom. Everything Min-ho's sterile, golden cage was not. Nia found herself drawn to Yi-sung's energy, but it was a distraction, a drug to numb the confusion she felt about her husband. Yi-sung was fun, but he was edged with something sharper, something malicious. He didn't just want to annoy Min-ho, he wanted to dismantle him. "You know why he's like that, don't you?" Yi-sung asked one night, leaning against his Ducati in an alleyway behind a club. "Min-ho thinks he has to carry the sins of the whole family. He thinks if he's perfect, if he controls everything, the blood won't touch anyone else. But he's drowning, Nia, and he wants to drag you down with him." Nia zipped up her jacket, shivering. "And you're the savior," Yi-sung smirked, the neon sign above buzzing red against his skin. "I'm the reality check." The breaking point came 2 weeks later on the night of the Lunar New Year banquet. It was the most important event of the calendar for the syndicate. All the clan elders were present, men who remembered the war, men who valued tradition above life itself. Nia wore a gown of crimson silk, looking like a queen, but she felt like a traitor. Min-ho was at the head of the table, accepting obeisance, looking every inch the emperor of the underworld. But his eyes kept darting to her, seeking reassurance, seeking connection. Nia denied him. Instead, she met Yi-sung's gaze across the room. He signaled her toward the terrace. She followed, her pulse hammering. She knew Min-ho was watching. She wanted him to watch. This was the final act. On the snowy terrace, the air was biting cold. Yi-sung handed her a cigarette she didn't smoke, just for the aesthetic of rebellion. "He's watching," Yi-sung murmured, not looking back. "He's standing by the window, looking like he's about to murder half the population of Seoul." Nia felt a tear prick her eye, hot and stinging. "This feels cruel, Yi-sung." He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious, devoid of the usual mockery. He stepped close, crowding her space. "It is cruel. Love in our world is a weakness, Nia. If he loves you, his enemies will use you to gut him. By making him hate you, you are saving his life. Do it." He grabbed her face, his fingers digging into her jaw, and pulled her in. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of performance, staged for the audience of one behind the glass. The terrace door didn't just open, it exploded inward. Min-ho was there, a hurricane in a tuxedo. He didn't yell, he didn't scream. The silence he brought was terrifying. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, ripping Yi-sung away from her and throwing him against the stone railing with enough force to crack the masonry. Yi-sung laughed, wiping blood from his lip. "Took you long enough, brother." Min-ho didn't hit him again. He turned to Nia. The look on his face haunts her. It wasn't anger. It was total, devastating betrayal. It was the look of a man who had finally allowed himself to believe in something, only to have it proven a lie. "Inside," he said, his voice a dead thing. "Now." The ride home was a funeral procession. When they entered the penthouse, Min-ho dismissed the guards. He locked the door. He walked to the safe, pulled out a stack of documents, the medical records, the bank transfers, the contract, and threw them onto the coffee table. They scattered like dry leaves. "Is this what it was?" he asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Just the money, just the deal." Nia stood her ground, though her knees were trembling. "Article 4, Min-ho, full autonomy, no feelings. You were the one who forgot the rules. You were the one who started looking at me like I was real." "You are real," Min-ho roared, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. He stormed toward her, stopping inches from her face. "I broke the rules because you are the only thing in this god-forsaken life that felt real. I gave you everything. I protected you. I compromised my standing with the elders to keep you safe. And you run to him, to Yi-sung." He laughed bitterly, a jagged sound. "He doesn't want you, Nia. He wants to hurt me. And you let him use you like a cheap weapon." "I used him," Nia shouted back, tears finally spilling over. "I used him to make you stop. You were getting too close, Min-ho. You were falling in love, and I can't have that. I can't be your weakness. I can't be the reason you lose control. I am here for my sister. That is it. I am an employee. And tonight I proved that I am not your wife." Min-ho stared at her, his chest heaving. The confession hung in the air that she had done it to push him away, not out of desire for Yi-sung. But it didn't fix the wound, it deepened it. He looked at her with a profound, exhausted sadness. "You think my love is a weakness," he whispered, stepping back. "You think it makes me vulnerable." He walked to the window, looking out at the city he ruled. "You are wrong. My love for you was the only thing making me want to be a better man. Without it." He turned back to her, and the light was gone from his eyes. The mafia boss was back, cold, unreachable. "Without it, I am just the monster everyone fears. You wanted a professional arrangement. You have it. From this moment on, you are nothing but a guest in this house. Do not speak to me unless necessary. Do not look at me." He walked past her toward his bedroom, bumping her shoulder as if she were furniture. Nia stood in the living room, surrounded by the scattered papers of their contract, sobbing silently. She had won. She had successfully killed his love and re-established the boundaries. But as the door clicked shut, finalizing the distance between them, she realized with a sickening lurch that she had lied. She hadn't done it just for the contract. She had done it because she was terrified that she loved him too, and she knew that in his world, love was a death sentence. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was glacial. Min-ho was gone before she woke. The guards were different, new faces, harder, less polite. They didn't speak to her, they just watched. Nia went to the hospital, but the victory of seeing Maya sitting up and eating felt hollow. When she returned that evening, the penthouse was empty. Days turned into a week of silence. Yi-sung called, but she ignored him. The affair had served its purpose, and the taste of it was ash in her mouth. But the silence was the calm before the storm. Nia didn't know that while she was playing heart games, the enemies of the Cheon-sa Syndicate were watching the fractures in the leadership. They saw the discord between the brothers. They saw the distracted, heartbroken leader. They saw the vulnerability. It happened on a rainy Thursday. Nia was leaving the hospital, stepping under her umbrella as the black sedan pulled up. She expected the driver to open the door. Instead, a van screeched to a halt behind her. Men in masks poured out, moving with military precision. The new guards Min-ho had hired reacted too slowly. A taser dart hit the lead guard in the neck. Nia turned to run, but a heavy hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her backward. The smell of chloroform filled her nose. As the world tilted and went black, the last thing she thought of wasn't her sister or the money. It was Min-ho's face in the moonlight, the moment before he closed his heart to her, and the crushing realization that she might die without ever telling him the truth. The war had come for her, just as Yi-sung had warned, but Min-ho wasn't there to stop it. He was miles away, buried in ice, believing she belonged to another man. Nia woke to the taste of copper and dust. Her head throbbed with a rhythmic, blinding pain, a souvenir from the chloroform and the hard impact of the van floor. She was seated in a wooden chair, her wrists bound behind her with zip ties that bit into her skin. The room was a cavernous, abandoned slaughterhouse, the air thick with the smell of rust and old dampness. High above, rain hammered against a corrugated metal roof, masking any sound from the outside world. She wasn't alone. A man sat on a crate in front of her, peeling an apple with a knife that looked sharp enough to split a hair. It was Chairman Kang, the leader of the rival Viper clan. A man Min-ho had warned her was a relic of a more brutal era. He was older, his face a roadmap of scars, his eyes twinkling with a grandfatherly malice that was far more terrifying than Min-ho's cold stoicism. "The Sleeping Beauty awakes," Kang said, slicing a piece of apple and popping it into his mouth. "I must say, Mrs. Park, you are much more troublesome than the usual wives Min-ho chooses. Usually they are quiet, invisible. You make noise." Nia tested the bonds. They held fast. "If you want money," she rasped, her throat dry, "Min-ho will pay it." Kang laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. "Money? No, my dear, I have money. I want the Cheon-sa Syndicate. And thanks to you and the delightful chaos you caused, the gates are open." He stood up, walking slowly around her chair. It was almost too easy. Min-ho, the unshakable mountain distracted by a woman, and then the internal conflict, the brother against the brother. Kang leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tea. "You think Yi-sung seduced you to prove your professional worth? You think it was a game to annoy his big brother?" Nia went still. That was exactly what she thought. Kang clicked his tongue, shaking his head mockingly. "You Americans are so naive. Yi-sung didn't approach you for fun. He didn't even do it for the power. He did it for the ghost." Nia frowned, confusion warring with fear. "What are you talking about?" "The family secret," Kang whispered, looking delighted to be the one to break the news. 10 years ago, before Min-ho was the boss, there was another woman, a civilian. She was Yi-sung's fiancée. She was sweet, innocent, much like you. But the clan elders decided she was a weakness. They ordered her removed. And do you know who pulled the trigger? Do you know who executed his own brother's heart to prove his loyalty to the crown?" Kang paused for effect, his eyes gleaming. "Min-ho. Min-ho killed her. He chose the throne over his brother's happiness. Yi-sung has never forgiven him. He has been waiting a decade for Min-ho to fall in love, just so he could help destroy the woman Min-ho cherishes. You aren't a partner in Yi-sung's game, Nia. You are the sacrificial lamb in his revenge." The revelation hit Nia harder than the kidnapping. The playful, rebellious Yi-sung, the man who had laughed with her on the terrace. He was fueled by a grief so deep it had rotted into hatred. He hadn't been helping her build a wall. He had been setting her up to be executed, to make Min-ho feel the exact pain he had felt 10 years ago. Tears welled in her eyes, not for herself, but for the sheer tragedy of it. For Min-ho, who had carried the burden of that sin in silence. For Yi-sung, twisted by loss. And for herself, a pawn in a blood feud she barely understood. Meanwhile, across the city, the penthouse was a hurricane of activity. But in the center of the storm, Min-ho was deadly calm. He stood in front of a bank of monitors, replaying the footage of Nia's abduction for the 100th time. The way she struggled, the way she looked back. He was strapping a Kevlar vest over his dress shirt, his movements mechanical. He checked the magazine of his pistol, slammed it home, and holstered it. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the executioner the legends said he was. The door to the safe room opened, and his men dragged a struggling figure inside. It was Yi-sung. Min-ho's men threw Yi-sung to the floor. Yi-sung looked disheveled, drunk, but defiant. He looked up at his brother, a sneer forming on his lips. "Lost something, brother," Min-ho didn't yell. He signaled his men to leave the room. When the heavy door clicked shut, Min-ho walked over, grabbed Yi-sung by the lapels of his leather jacket and slammed him against the wall. "Kang has her," Min-ho said, his voice a low vibration that shook the air. "They took her to the old ironworks in Incheon." Yi-sung's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second. "So, that wasn't the plan. I gave them the security route so they could hit your shipments, not take the girl. They lied." Min-ho stared into his brother's eyes, seeing the broken boy beneath the bravado. "They didn't lie, Yi-sung. You just didn't care enough to ask. You wanted to hurt me. Congratulations, you succeeded. But if she dies tonight, you won't just be the man who lost his fiancée. You'll be the man who became me." Yi-sung froze. The mention of the past hung between them like a blade. "Don't you dare speak about her," Yi-sung hissed, his eyes filling with sudden, raw tears. "You killed her. You took everything from me because the elders told you to. I just wanted you to know what it feels like to lose the only thing that makes you human." "I didn't kill her," Min-ho roared, the confession finally tearing out of him after 10 years of silence. He released Yi-sung, stepping back, his chest heaving. "I didn't kill her, Yi-sung. I helped her escape. I faked the hit. I sent her to America with a new identity because I knew if she stayed, the elders would torture her to get to you." Min-ho reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, folded photograph. He threw it at Yi-sung. It landed on the floor. Yi-sung stared at it. It was a photo of a woman, older, smiling, holding a child. The date stamp was from last year. "She's alive. She's happy. I took the blame. I let you hate me for a decade because if you knew she was alive, you would have gone to her and they would have found her." Yi-sung fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he picked up the photo. The hate that had sustained him, the rage that had defined his life, crumbled into dust. He looked up at Min-ho, his face pale with shock and guilt. "She's alive," Min-ho nodded, adjusting his cuffs, though his hands were shaking too. "I protected her, just like I was trying to protect Nia. But thanks to your revenge, the woman I love is about to be butchered by Kang." Yi-sung stared at the photo, then at his brother. The realization of what he had done crashed down on him. He had sold out the only family he had left to avenge a death that never happened. He stood up, wiping his face, his expression hardening. The reckless playboy was gone. In his place was a soldier. "The ironworks," Yi-sung said, his voice steady. "The north entrance is blocked, but I know the ventilation shafts. I used to run crates there for Kang's lieutenants." Min-ho looked at him, assessing the threat. "Are you with me, or do I have to kill you before I leave?" Yi-sung pulled a handgun from his waistband and checked the chamber. "You drive, I'll shoot." The drive to Incheon was a blur of rain and speed. They didn't speak, but the air between them had shifted. The wall of hatred was gone, replaced by a singular, desperate mission. When they arrived at the shipyard, the rain was torrential. They moved like shadows, Min-ho taking the lead, Yi-sung covering his six. It was a dance of violence they hadn't performed together since they were teenagers. They breached the perimeter, silencing guards with efficient, brutal coordination. Min-ho was a force of nature, driven by a terror he had never felt before. Every minute Nia was in there was a minute closer to death. Inside the warehouse, Kang was growing bored. He held a lighter to Nia's face, watching the flame dance in her eyes. "Last words, Mrs. Park, or should I say Ms. Nobody?" Nia stared at the flame, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's coming," she whispered. "And he's not alone." Kang laughed, turning to his men. "Did you hear that? She thinks the fractured brothers are." The massive metal doors of the warehouse blew inward with a deafening crash. Smoke and debris filled the air. Two figures emerged from the gloom, backlit by the lightning outside. Min-ho and Yi-sung stood side by side, guns raised. "Get away from her," Min-ho said. It wasn't a shout. It was a promise of violence so absolute that even Kang took a step back. "Kill them," Kang screamed. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire flashed like strobe lights. Min-ho moved with terrifying precision, taking down 3 men before they could raise their weapons. He didn't seek cover, he moved forward, a straight line toward Nia. Yi-sung vaulted over crates, drawing fire, laughing manically as he provided covering fire for his brother. "Go, Min-ho, get her!" Yi-sung shouted, pinning down a group of mercenaries with suppressive fire. Min-ho reached the chair. He didn't waste time untying the knots. He used a knife to slash the zip ties. Nia fell forward into his arms, sobbing. The moment he touched her, the monster vanished, replaced by the man who had covered her with a shawl. He pulled her tight against his chest, burying his face in her neck, breathing in her scent to confirm she was alive. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I've got you." But the reunion was cut short. "Look out!" Nia screamed. Min-ho spun around, shielding her with his body as Kang emerged from the shadows, a submachine gun in his hands. But before Kang could pull the trigger, a blur of motion tackled him. It was Yi-sung. He slammed into the older man, knocking the gun away, and they wrestled on the concrete floor. A single gunshot rang out, loud, final, and sickening. Both brothers froze. Kang slumped to the floor, a bullet hole in his chest. Yi-sung stood over him, panting, his own gun smoking. He looked at Min-ho, then at Nia. He looked down at his side, where a dark stain was rapidly spreading across his white shirt. "Well," Yi-sung wheezed, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. "That settles the debt, doesn't it?" He swayed, his knees buckling. "Yi-sung!" Min-ho screamed, the sound tearing through the warehouse. He left Nia's side, sliding across the floor to catch his brother before he hit the ground. The enemies were dead or fleeing. The silence returned, heavier than before. Min-ho pressed his hands against Yi-sung's wound, the blood hot and sticky. "You idiot," Min-ho choked out. "You stupid idiot, stay with me." Nia crawled over, her hands shaking as she tried to help apply pressure. Yi-sung looked up at her, his eyes glazing over. "Tell him," Yi-sung whispered to Nia, his voice barely audible. "Tell him the contract was bullshit anyway. He loves you." He looked at Min-ho. "I'm sorry, Hyung, for everything." His eyes fluttered shut. Min-ho let out a roar of anguish that shook the dust from the rafters, pulling his brother's unconscious body into his arms. Nia watched, helpless, realizing that the game they had played had cost the highest price imaginable. The rescue was complete, but the night was far from over. The drive to the private clinic was a blur of red lights and terrifying speed. Min-ho drove like a man possessed, one hand on the wheel, the other pressing a towel against his brother's side. Nia sat in the back, leaning forward, keeping pressure on the wound, her hands slick with the warm, metallic reality of the night's violence. "Stay with us," she whispered, over and over, as if her voice could tether Yi-sung's drifting soul to his body. Yi-sung was pale, his breathing shallow and ragged, but his eyes were open, fixed on the roof of the car, glassy and distant. When they arrived at the underground medical facility, a sterile, high-tech fortress hidden beneath a nondescript textile factory, a team of doctors was already waiting. They swarmed the car, pulling Yi-sung onto a gurney. Min-ho tried to follow them into the operating theater, his composure finally shattering. "Save him," he roared at the lead surgeon, grabbing the man by his scrubs. "If he dies, you all die." The surgeon didn't flinch, merely nodded and disappeared behind the swinging doors. Min-ho was left standing in the stark white hallway, his chest heaving, his immaculate suit ruined, covered in the blood of the brother he had spent a decade protecting by pushing away. He looked at his hands, trembling for the first time in his life. He looked like a man who had reached the edge of his endurance. Nia approached him slowly. She was bruised, exhausted, and terrified, but she didn't hesitate. She took his hands in hers. He flinched at the touch, then looked down at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, stripped of all their usual icy defenses. "He will make it," Nia said firmly, squeezing his blood-stained fingers. "He's stubborn like you." Min-ho slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold floor. He pulled Nia down with him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. For a long time they just sat there, the silence of the hospital punctuated only by the distant beep of machinery. "I almost lost him," Min-ho murmured, his voice muffled against her skin. "And I almost lost you, the two people. The only two people." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You didn't lose us," Nia said softly, stroking his hair. "We're here." Hours bled into one another. When the surgeon finally emerged, dawn was breaking. "The bullet missed the major arteries," the doctor said, looking exhausted. "He lost a lot of blood and the recovery will be long, but..." He will survive. The relief that washed over Min-ho was physical. His shoulders dropped and he let out a long, shuddering breath. He stood up, helped Nia to her feet and looked at her with a clarity she hadn't seen before. "Go home, Nia," he said quietly. "My driver is outside. Get some rest. You've been through hell." "I'm not going anywhere," she countered, crossing her arms. "Not without you." He looked at her, really looked at her, searching for the fear that should have been there. He saw only resolve. He nodded once. "Then we wait." 2 days later, Yi-sung was awake. The brothers spoke alone for an hour. Nia watched from the hallway through the glass partition. She saw tears, she saw anger, and finally she saw an embrace, awkward, hindered by IV lines but genuine. When Min-ho came out, he held a piece of paper in his hand. "I gave him the address," Min-ho said, staring at the paper before folding it away. "His fiancée. She's in Seattle. When he's strong enough, he's going to her." "You're letting him go?" Nia asked. "I'm setting him free," Min-ho corrected. "I held on to him too tight because I was afraid of being alone in the dark. But I'm not alone anymore, am I?" He turned his gaze to her, intense and heavy with unspoken questions. The ride back to the penthouse felt different. The city was the same, the neon lights, the rain-slicked streets, but the air between them had changed. It was no longer charged with static and secrets. It was heavy with a truth that needed to be spoken. When they entered the apartment, it was quiet. The scattered papers of the contract were still on the floor where Min-ho had thrown them the night of the abduction. It felt like a lifetime ago. Min-ho walked over to the mess. He knelt and picked up the contract, the document that had defined their relationship as a transaction. Article 4. No feelings. He stood up, took a lighter from his pocket, the same silver Zippo he had clicked nervously for months, and flicked it open. He held the flame to the corner of the document. "What are you doing?" Nia asked, her breath catching. "I am voiding the terms," Min-ho said. Watching the fire curl the edges of the paper, turning the legal jargon into ash. He dropped the burning paper into a metal waste bin and watched it turn to black dust. "The contract is null and void. The debt is paid. Your sister's medical bills are covered in perpetuity. You are free, Nia. You can take the money. You can leave. You can find a life that is safe with a man who doesn't have a target on his back." Nia watched the fire die out. She looked at the man standing before her, a man who commanded armies of criminals but looked terrified of her answer. She thought of the safety he offered. She thought of the danger she had just survived. Then she thought of the way he had looked at her in the warehouse, the way he had shielded her body with his own. She realized that safety without him would just be a different kind of prison. She walked across the room, the heels of her boots clicking on the marble. She stopped inches from him. "You're firing me," she teased gently, a callback to their first cold meetings. Min-ho didn't smile. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over a small cut on her lip. "I am giving you a choice. I never gave you one before. I bought you. I trapped you. Now I am opening the door." "I don't want the door," Nia whispered, leaning into his touch. "I want the man." Min-ho's expression crumbled, raw hope breaking through the stoicism. "I am not a good man, Nia. I am a monster to the rest of the world. I have blood on my hands that will never wash off." "I know," Nia said, covering his hand with hers. "I saw the monster. I saw him tear the world apart to find me, and I love him." The confession hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. Min-ho let out a low, ragged sound, part laugh, part sob, and pulled her to him. This time there was no performance, no audience, no brothers to provoke. He kissed her with a desperation that consumed them both, a kiss that tasted of survival and promise. It was the sealing of a new covenant, one written not in ink, but in shared scars. 6 months later. The gala for the opening of the new pediatric wing at Seoul National Hospital, funded entirely by the Park Foundation, was the event of the season. Cameras flashed as the city's elite arrived, but the hush that fell over the crowd was reserved for the arrival of Mr. and Mrs. Park. Min-ho stepped out of the black limousine first, looking as sharp and dangerous as ever in a tuxedo. But instead of the cold, solitary figure he used to be, he turned and extended a hand. Nia took it. She emerged, radiant in a gown of deep emerald green, her hair cascading in natural curls. She didn't look like a trophy wife walking in a shadow. She walked beside him, her head held high, her grip on his hand firm. Inside the ballroom, they moved as one entity. Min-ho was still the feared boss of the Cheon-sa, and everyone knew it. But they also saw the way he deferred to her, the way his eyes tracked her when she moved across the room to speak to the donors. They saw the way he touched the small of her back, protective, yes, but also adoring. Nia found her sister, Maya, by the buffet table. Maya looked healthy, glowing with life, laughing with a young doctor. Nia felt a warm hand on her waist and leaned back into Min-ho's chest. "She looks happy," Min-ho murmured in her ear. "She is," Nia replied, "thanks to you." "No," Min-ho corrected, turning her to face him, ignoring the hundreds of eyes watching them. "Thanks to us." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket. A letter came today, from Seattle. Nia's eyes widened. Yi-sung. Min-ho nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He found her. They are opening a small restaurant near the coast. He says he is learning to cook, which is terrifying, but he sounds at peace. "And you," Nia asked, tracing the line of his jaw, "are you at peace?" Min-ho looked around the room, at the empire he built, at the enemies he had buried, and finally at the woman who had walked into his office as a transaction and become his entire world. The darkness was still there, at the edges of his life. The threats would always be there, but he was no longer drowning in them. "I have you," Min-ho said simply, kissing her forehead. "So yes, I have everything." As the orchestra began to play a slow waltz, Min-ho led her to the dance floor. They moved together, a perfect synchronization of darkness and light. The contract was ash. The fiction was over. The reality was dangerous, beautiful, and undeniably theirs. And as Min-ho spun her around, Nia laughed, a sound of pure freedom that echoed louder than any gunshot.